Walter Akerson Jr.'s case is one of a young man whose disappearance was shrouded in confusion and tragic events that only came to light years later. Born in Kettle Falls, Washington, Walter's life was marked by family struggles and personal challenges. His parents separated in the 1970s, and Walter lived with his mother, Karen Hull. They eventually moved to Puyallup, Washington, in the late 1980s, where Walter struggled in school, was frequently bullied, and began abusing alcohol. Despite his above-average test scores, his truancy and behavioral issues led him to leave his mother's home and move in with his grandmother, Dolores Owens, in Tenino, Washington. After a brief stay with his ex-stepfather and younger brother in Spokane, Washington, Walter returned to Puyallup and entered family counseling with his mother. In March 1990, seeking to give Walter a fresh start, his mother agreed to let him join the federal Job Corps program, which was designed to help troubled youth get their GEDs and learn a trade. Walter was placed at the Angel Job Corps facility in Yachits, Oregon, some 300 miles from home. Hull was hopeful the program would help Walter get back on track, as it offered supervision, prohibited alcohol, and provided a structured environment. Walter was particularly interested in culinary arts, and at first, he called his mother and grandmother regularly. However, his last phone call to his grandmother on March 20th would be the last time his family heard from him. In that call, Walter said, "This place is nothing like you think it is." On March 24th, 1990, just 2 weeks after Walter entered the Job Corps, he and 3 older fellow students, Troy Culver, Eric Forsgren, and Jeff Callaghan, left the facility without permission and hitchhiked to Nye Beach, off Oregon Highway 101, about 25 miles from Yachits. According to his friends, Walter was last seen standing on a bluff above the beach while the others played football below. After that, Walter vanished without a trace, and the group returned to the Job Corps facility without him. Despite the unusual circumstances, the Job Corps initially wrote Walter off as a runaway. They failed to notify his mother until April 5th, violating their own policy, which stated that parents should be contacted within 24 hours. When Hull requested that a missing persons report be filed, the Job Corps refused. It wasn't until April 16th that Walter was officially reported missing. When Hull and Owens went to the Job Corps to collect Walter's belongings, they were told that Walter had taken everything with him, but they were later given his possessions, except for his baseball card collection. The Job Corps claimed that they had notified Hull and Owens about Walter's disappearance, but this was proven to be false. Neither Hull nor Owens had received any communication from them, and when they confronted Job Corps staff about their false statements, the staff admitted that perhaps they hadn't properly informed them. Hull and Owens were allowed to meet with Culver, Forsgren, and Callaghan. While they repeated their story about Walter's disappearance, Culver did apologize to Hull, stating that he felt guilty for Walter's disappearance, as he had been responsible for him. An important clue came from Emma Beller, who was reportedly Walter's girlfriend at the time. She told Hull that she had heard Culver and Forsgren got into a fight with Walter and threw him off a bridge. Hull took this information to the police, but they dismissed it, stating that if Walter had been thrown off a bridge, his body would have washed ashore. Nevertheless, Hull continued to search for answers, even returning to the Job Corps to put up missing person posters, though she was not allowed on the property. The investigation into Walter's disappearance slowed, with police accepting the Job Corps' assertion that Walter had run away. Culver, Forsgren, and Callaghan left the Job Corps in the summer of 1990. While Callaghan graduated, Culver and Forsgren were expelled for rule violations. Culver was readmitted to the Job Corps in 1994 and, in his application, admitted to having a drinking problem and becoming violent when intoxicated. In 2001, Culver's criminal behavior escalated when he assaulted a woman and threatened her with a gun. He was convicted of third-degree assault and unlawful gun possession, and later, he was convicted of encouraging child sex abuse. Forsgren, on the other hand, had multiple theft and drug-related convictions, but was not interviewed by law enforcement about Walter's disappearance until 1996. He reiterated the same story about Walter disappearing while the group played football. The case remained cold for years until 2004, when the investigation was reopened after one of Walter's missing child flyers was found in the home of a suspected pedophile. A new officer with the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office tracked down Forsgren and Culver for additional interviews, but both stuck to the same story. It wasn't until 2005 that Callaghan, who had never been interviewed by police before, was questioned and backed up the stories of Culver and Forsgren. Then, in August 2009, Culver made a shocking confession to his parole officer while participating in a drug treatment program, which required participants to make amends for past wrongs. He admitted to beating Walter, who had been drunk and whining, until he was unconscious or possibly dead. Culver, Forsgren, and Callaghan then took Walter's body to the Yuckwinna Bay Bridge and threw it off over 100 feet into the water. They returned to the Job Corps, washed their bloody clothes, and fabricated a story about Walter's disappearance. When police interviewed Forsgren and Callaghan about Culver's confession, they corroborated the details. Forsgren believed Walter was alive when they threw him off the bridge, and Callaghan admitted to telling others about the murder shortly after it happened. The confessions led to further investigation, and in October 2010, Culver pleaded guilty to manslaughter in Walter's case. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with 3 years of probation to follow. Forsgren and Callaghan both admitted their roles in Walter's presumed death and were granted immunity from prosecution. Though Culver was convicted, the case remains unsolved in some respects, as Walter's body was never recovered, and the full extent of the other suspects' involvement remains unclear. The Lincoln County Sheriff's Office in Washington continues to investigate Walter's disappearance, which is now classified as a non-family abduction. Given the circumstances and the involvement of multiple parties, foul play is suspected in his case. Toby Anderson was last seen in Selma, Oregon, sometime between September and October of 1986. At the time of his disappearance, he had been staying with various relatives due to ongoing family problems. The family heard conflicting stories about his whereabouts, with some suggesting he had run away and others speculating he had died in a car accident. In 2018, Toby's cousin, Denise McGarity, began investigating his disappearance. Her research led her to discover that Toby's paternal uncle, Almer W. Billy Wright, was the last person known to have lived with him. Wright told McGarity that Toby had been caught trying to assault one of his daughters and had hidden in a chicken coop afterward. Wright claimed that he found Toby there and drove him away from the property in his car. After this, Wright's account became increasingly inconsistent and unclear. In one version of the story, Wright claimed he had dropped Toby off at either the juvenile hall or the police department in Cave Junction, Oregon, leaving him there. In another version, Wright stated that Toby was likely dead and had been killed by a blow to the back of the head. He also mentioned that Toby's body was buried on a property in California. Further complicating the situation, other family members told McGarity that after Toby went missing, Wright had made threats to them, saying they would end up on a hill like Toby. At the time of Toby's disappearance, Wright was involved in the drug trade and had a history of domestic violence. Several months after Toby went missing, Wright moved his family to Arkansas, claiming that he had to care for his sick mother. However, it was later discovered that his mother was not actually ill. Wright is currently in prison for assault and endangerment and is scheduled to be released in September 2021. The circumstances surrounding Toby's disappearance remain unclear. There is no evidence supporting the idea that Toby died in a car accident, and law enforcement has stated that if Wright had indeed dropped Toby off at a police station or juvenile hall as he claimed, a report would have been filed and Toby's parents would have been contacted. McGarity and authorities have found no indication that Toby was alive after 1986. McGarity believes her cousin was murdered the night he disappeared and that his body is buried somewhere on the 5-acre property where he had lived with his uncle. Despite the passage of time, Toby Anderson's case remains unsolved. John Anstis, along with 2 other men, Richard Beckman and David Irvin Rodman, disappeared off the coast of Oregon on December 11, 2006, while delivering a luxurious 44-foot catamaran called the Cat Shot from Cape Town, South Africa, to its new owner in Seattle, Washington. The vessel, which was valued at approximately $600,000, had 4 staterooms and was intended for a long journey. The men had set off from Cape Town in October, with their last stop being in San Francisco on December 8, 2006, to gather fuel and provisions before continuing on their journey. Shortly after departing, they encountered severe weather conditions in the ocean. The storm had sustained winds of up to 40 miles per hour, with swells reaching 30 to 40 feet. This dangerous weather eventually led to the Cat Shot being found demasted and floating upside down in the ocean. The crew, however, was nowhere to be found. The boat's emergency position indicating radio beacon was still locked in its box, suggesting the crew had not used it to signal distress. The last logbook entry was made at 3 a.m. on December 11th, when the crew was 10 miles off the coast of Cape Blanco, Oregon. The log stated that they had lowered the sails and dropped 2 anchors at that time. David Rodman, who was 69 years old at the time, was described as Caucasian, 6 feet 5 inches tall, weighing 175 pounds, with brown hair and hazel eyes. He had an appendectomy scar on his abdomen. Vital statistics for Beckman are unavailable, and no photos of either of these 2 men are available. John Anstis, born in Great Britain, was an experienced sailor who made a living delivering yachts all over the world. Rodman shared a similar profession as a yacht deliverer. The 3 men are presumed to have been lost at sea, and their cases remain under investigation by Washington police. The circumstances surrounding their disappearance, particularly the lack of distress signals and the finding of the boat, remain mysterious. Robert Gerritsen was a deckhand on the 70-foot fishing trawler the Lady Cecilia, which tragically sank about 17 miles off the coast of southern Washington on March 10, 2012. The vessel went down unexpectedly, without any distress calls or flares being sent out. It was only when the emergency position indicating radio beacon was activated that anyone realized something was wrong. The Coast Guard station in Warrenton, Oregon received the APIRB signal at 3:30 a.m., prompting a search operation. A Coast Guard helicopter was dispatched, and they located an oil slick, some crab pots, an empty life raft, and other debris floating in the ocean. These scattered remnants indicated a sudden and catastrophic event. Gerritsen, an experienced fisherman, was known to be highly capable, able to put on his survival suit in under 13 seconds. This, coupled with the fact that there was no distress signal, suggested that the Lady Cecilia sank extremely quickly, possibly within mere seconds. There was speculation that the trawler could have been struck by a rogue wave, collided with another vessel, or suffered some kind of catastrophic mechanical failure. The Coast Guard launched a massive search effort, covering over 640 square miles of ocean, but they were unable to find any sign of Gerritsen or the other 3 crew members: Luke Jensen, 22, David Nichols, 42, and Chris Langle, 25. The lack of any physical evidence, aside from the debris, was concerning. Despite this extensive search, none of the men were found. In September 2012, a maritime salvage company hired by the Coast Guard located the Lady Cecilia itself on the ocean floor at a depth of 460 feet, about 20 miles off Ledbetter Point. However, there were no bodies found aboard the sunken vessel, and the fate of the crew members remained a mystery. At the time of his disappearance, Gerritsen lived with his girlfriend and their young son. His family, along with the families of the other crew members, has been left without closure. The Coast Guard considers Gerritsen and the others to be lost at sea, and their case remains unresolved. Celia Barnes was last seen hiking near the 6,000 block of the right fork of Sardine Creek Road in the area around the House of Mystery in Gold Hill, Oregon, on September 1, 2002. She had gone on a hike that day with her sister, and they had planned to meet up later at Barnes' sister's car. However, the 2 women separated to look for aluminum cans during their hike, and Barnes never showed up at the designated meeting point. She has not been seen since. Although Barnes had previously been reported missing after getting lost on a hike, she was found safe on that occasion and expressed anger at her family for notifying a search party. As a result, her family waited 30 hours before notifying authorities of her disappearance this time. There were some potential sightings of Barnes on the day she vanished. A man reported seeing her and said she told him she was on her way back to her sister's car. Additionally, another witness might have seen her at the Valley of Rogue State Park. Tracker dogs followed her scent to the off-ramp of northbound Interstate 5, which led investigators to believe she might have walked down Sardine Creek Road to the highway. 2 local residents also claimed to have seen her, but none of these sightings were ever confirmed. A week after Barnes's disappearance, a man in Gold Hill found a bronze ski pole that Barnes used as a walking stick. He passed a polygraph test and has not been considered a suspect in the case. At the time of her disappearance, Barnes lived in the 100 block of Brookside Boulevard in Merlin, Oregon. She was an experienced hiker and an ex-Marine who had served in Vietnam. Her family does not believe she left voluntarily and suspects she may have been abducted. Despite the ongoing investigation, very little concrete evidence has been uncovered to explain her fate. Her case remains unsolved. Robert Bissell was last seen on July 12, 2010, when he left his home in Portland, Oregon, to go camping in the Roaring River Wilderness area near Rock Lakes, located above Estacada, Oregon. He was an experienced outdoorsman, and his destination was an area well known for its remote and rugged terrain. He drove his white 1989 Nissan Sentra to Trailhead 700 near Rock Lakes, where he parked his vehicle before setting off on his hike. Bissell reportedly hiked about 5 miles and set up camp off Trail 512 near Middle Rock Lake. It appeared he was only planning to stay briefly, as he left behind his sleeping bag and other camping gear, taking with him only his fishing rod and tackle. His plan was likely to fish for the day, a relatively short excursion into the wilderness. On July 19th, Bissell's brother went to the campsite to check on him, but Bissell was nowhere to be found. Concerned, his brother left a note on Bissell's car, asking him to contact the family. However, when Bissell's brother returned on July 24th, there was still no sign of him. At this point, his brother contacted authorities, and a search was initiated the following day. An extensive search of the Mount Hood National Forest followed, with teams combing the wilderness area for any signs of Bissell. The terrain proved to be challenging, with rugged and dense forested areas that made the search difficult. In fact, 3 search horses had their shoes thrown off due to the tough conditions. Despite the thorough efforts, no evidence was found that could indicate Bissell's whereabouts. Given the circumstances, authorities believed Bissell may have become lost or injured shortly after he began his hike on July 12th. The rough terrain, combined with the time he had been missing, led investigators to suspect that he may have suffered some kind of accident, though no trace of him has been found. As of now, Bissell remains missing, and his body has never been located. His disappearance in such a challenging and remote area has left his family and authorities with few answers, and his case remains unsolved. Floyd Bennett was last seen at her home in Beaverton, Oregon, on the evening of February 23, 1978. According to her husband, Robert Eugene Bob Bennett, Floyd had gone out for a shopping trip but failed to return home. Despite this, she has never been heard from again. When her husband noticed her absence, he found that not only had she disappeared, but so had most of her belongings, including the contents of their home and a significant $90,000 inheritance she had received. Bob initially told authorities that he thought Floyd had run off with another man. He reported that 5 days after her disappearance, her rental car was found parked in their driveway, but there was no sign of Floyd herself. Some of her clothes and suitcases were missing, but there were no other clear indications of where she went. 2 weeks after she vanished, Bob filed for divorce. In 1986, Bob married his brother's widow, further complicating the circumstances surrounding his personal life after Floyd's disappearance. In 1989, Bob Bennett was convicted of second-degree murder for the shooting and subsequent disposal of a friend an occasional chess companion in Salt Lake City, Utah. This murder was entirely unrelated to Floyd's case, but it did raise red flags about Bob's potential involvement in other criminal activities. His victim, whose legs were found in a trash bin the day after he disappeared, was later identified, and parts of his body were found buried at a house Bob had previously rented. However, Bob has not been named as a suspect in Floyd's case, and the investigation into her disappearance did not produce any direct evidence linking him to her case. Despite the passage of time, authorities believe Floyd was likely the victim of homicide. After she disappeared, there were no indications that she used her social security number, bank accounts, or credit cards. Furthermore, she never picked up her last paycheck from her job as a court reporter for Multnomah County. Floyd's case remains unsolved, and investigators continue to treat it as a potential homicide, but there has been no breakthrough in finding out what happened to her. Maria Balano Rivera was last seen on August 26, 2012, leaving her home in the 500 block of Southeast Walnut Street in Hillsboro, Oregon. She told her family she would be back, but didn't specify where she was going. However, she never returned home and hasn't been heard from since. Balano Rivera left behind all of her belongings, including her wallet and medication, only taking her cell phone with her. Her 6 children, who described her as a devoted mother, firmly believed that she wouldn't have abandoned them. Investigators believed that Balano Rivera was with Eloy Vasquez-Santiago, a co-worker with whom she had been romantically involved. Vasquez-Santiago, despite also having a common-law wife and a child, was reportedly with Balano Rivera at the time of her disappearance. In late September 2012, Vasquez-Santiago was arrested in California and charged with her murder. Vasquez-Santiago confessed to the crime, claiming that he had stabbed Balano Rivera after an argument about money during a trip to the mountains. He stated that after killing her, he dumped her body near Hag Lake in Oregon and then fled to Mexico. He later decided to return to the United States and turn himself into the authorities. According to Vasquez-Santiago, the murder occurred after Balano Rivera insulted him during the argument. Following his confession, investigators searched the Hag Lake area for her body, but they found nothing of interest. In connection with the case, Vasquez-Santiago's father and brother were also charged with hindering prosecution, as they helped him evade police after Balano Rivera's disappearance. However, the charges against them were dropped in May 2014, after they had been in custody for over a year and a half. They remained in jail under material witness warrants, which allow authorities to hold individuals indefinitely if their testimony is crucial to a criminal trial and they are unlikely to make themselves available. Vasquez-Santiago's brother was held for 727 days until he agreed to give a deposition on video. His father, however, refused to testify and was held for 905 days until he eventually testified at the trial. Vasquez-Santiago was convicted of murder in March 2015 and sentenced to life in prison for Balano Rivera's death. Although Vasquez-Santiago confessed to the crime, Balano Rivera's body has never been found, and foul play is strongly suspected in her case due to the circumstances surrounding her disappearance and the subsequent events. Robert Bobo went missing in October 1998 while camping in a remote area of the Rogue River National Forest, located between Prospect and Union Creek, Oregon. On October 2, 1998, a female friend dropped him off at his campsite in the Woodruff Meadows area near 700 Road. Bobo was last seen at approximately 9 p.m. that night by 2 area hunters, but he has never been heard from again. The next day, one of his friends arrived at the campsite for the opening of hunting season, only to discover that Bobo was missing. At that point, he was reported as a missing person. When investigators looked into the disappearance, they found that Bobo had left behind all of his belongings, including his favorite baseball cap, 2 rifles, his clothes, and all his camping gear. He also didn't have any money with him at the time, which raised further questions about his sudden disappearance. Bobo's baseball cap, which was something he was known to never go without, was left behind at the campsite, leading some to believe that he didn't leave voluntarily. Searches of the area around Bobo's campsite yielded no evidence of his whereabouts or any clues to what had happened to him. Although authorities found no signs of foul play, they also didn't believe that Bobo simply walked away or left on his own. The theory that he may have been scouting another campsite, possibly becoming injured or experiencing a medical emergency that prevented him from returning to his camp, was suggested. However, Bobo's family feared that he had met with foul play, especially given the fact that his beloved baseball cap was left behind. His brother mentioned that Bobo never went anywhere without it, making it unlikely that he would have voluntarily left it behind. At the time of his disappearance, Bobo worked part-time as a woodcutter and lived in Prospect, Oregon. Despite numerous searches and investigations, his case remains unsolved, and his fate remains unknown. Mark Bosworth was last seen on September 16, 2011, during the Cycle Oregon event in Riddle, Oregon. He had volunteered to run a booth on Main Street near Riddle High School that evening. After finishing his shift, he was last seen walking along a road between Riddle and Canyonville, Oregon, sometime between 11 o'clock and 11:30 p.m. He told others that he was heading to his tent, but he never arrived there and has not been heard from since. On the day of his disappearance, Bosworth appeared unusually exhausted and was not acting like himself. He was quiet and didn't engage much with others at the event, which was out of character for him. He was unfamiliar with the Riddle area, which added concern to his sudden disappearance. Bosworth was carrying a small amount of cash, approximately $40, along with an iPhone 4 that had a dead battery. He may also have had a small black bag with straps, but he left behind his bicycle, wallet, credit cards, and identification. At the time, Bosworth was employed as a mapping specialist for the Portland Metro and had worked there for 20 years. He and his wife were about to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary, and they had 2 daughters together. Because of his condition at the time of his disappearance, Bosworth is considered to be at risk. It is possible that he is suffering from amnesia or confusion. There is also a concern that he may attempt to travel back to New York, where he had lived for 10 years during the 1980s. Despite extensive searches and investigations, his case remains unsolved, and his whereabouts remain unknown. Frances Brewster was last seen in October 1999 in the scenic region of Sun River, Oregon. At that time, she was residing with her adult son, John Shipman, having made the decision to move in with him after leaving a retirement community in Bend, Oregon. Following her disappearance, Shipman claimed that his mother was traveling with Walter Akerson, who had gone missing in July 1998. It is worth noting that Akerson was Brewster's brother-in-law, having been married to her late sister. In May 2000, Brewster's other son raised the alarm, reporting her missing. Concern had grown among family members due to the extended period without any communication from her. As investigations unfolded, it became apparent that Akerson's disappearance was also interconnected with Brewster's case. Law enforcement officials found that Shipman had been cashing the Social Security checks of both Brewster and Akerson after their disappearances came to light. In September 2001, when authorities attempted to apprehend him on unrelated domestic violence charges, he tragically took his own life with a shotgun. At the time of his death, he was facing federal indictments regarding the fraudulent check-cashing activities. Despite the lack of direct evidence linking him to the disappearances, authorities harbor strong suspicions that Shipman was involved in the murders of both his mother and uncle. They believe he may have buried their remains in a clandestine location somewhere in Central Oregon. As of now, neither Frances Brewster nor Walter Akerson has been found. Given the suspicious circumstances surrounding their cases, foul play is presumed. "14-year-old Jeremy Bright was a popular, sports-loving teenager from Grants Pass, Oregon, who looked forward to starting high school in the fall. In August 1986, he attended the Coos County Fair in Myrtle Point, Oregon, with his younger sister and their stepfather, Iraly. On Thursday, August 14th, Jeremy called his mother, Diane, around 4:45 p.m. to tell her he was heading to the fair with his sister and close friend, Johnny Fish. Witnesses later confirmed that Jeremy and Johnny were together at the fair. 5 hours later, at 9:40 p.m., Jeremy went to a local tavern owned by his grandmother to meet Iraly, who had just finished work. Iraly gave him a few dollars, and Jeremy left. This was the last time anyone saw him. 2 days later, Diane arrived in Myrtle Point to pick up Jeremy and his sister, but Jeremy was nowhere to be found. He had left behind his wallet, keys, and a new watch, and when he didn't return that night, Diane contacted the police. Initially, authorities believed Jeremy had run away to join the fair, but no evidence supported this theory, and his family and friends didn't believe he would have done so. By Sunday, August 17th, the fair had left town, and rumors about Jeremy's disappearance began to emerge. During the week of the fair, several parties had taken place, and one rumor suggested that Jeremy had attended a party where he was offered a beer laced with a powerful illegal drug. One investigator found witnesses who placed him at 2 parties that week, and it was theorized that he might have accidentally overdosed, possibly exacerbated by a heart murmur. An anonymous jail source later gave a chilling account. The source claimed that 3 local teenagers had harassed Jeremy and some friends while they were swimming in a nearby lake. One of the teens allegedly had a gun and began shooting at Jeremy for target practice. According to the source, Jeremy was shot and severely wounded. The teenagers reportedly took him to a local cabin in an attempt to care for him, but he later died from his injuries. The source claimed that the teenagers then buried his body in the woods near the cabin. Authorities conducted a search in the area, but nothing was found. Later, authorities spoke with Johnny Fish's sister, Cecilia, who provided disturbing information. Between midnight and 1 a.m. the night after Jeremy vanished, she and a friend ran into a neighborhood teen covered in blood. Shocked, they asked him what had happened, and he supposedly replied, "This happened hours ago," before laughing and entering an apartment. About half an hour later, Johnny arrived at his sister's apartment, visibly shaking and terrified, though he refused to explain what had happened. After 3 months of inactivity, the Coos County Sheriff's Department was contacted for help in the search for Jeremy. Despite several leads and witness testimonies, Jeremy's body was never found, and his case remains unsolved. Several individuals have been considered persons of interest in Jeremy's disappearance, although no names have been publicly revealed. Among the prime suspects were Terry Steinhoff, Jeremy's former babysitter, and his cousin, David Steinhoff. According to some accounts, Jeremy was last seen alive, sitting in a vehicle with Terry Steinhoff, while David Steinhoff was reportedly seen covered in blood shortly after Jeremy's disappearance. The Coos County Sheriff's Office arrested David Steinhoff on Sunday, August 24, 1986, on charges of firearm possession and burglary. However, he was released on his own recognizance. Although police interviewed Terry Steinhoff about the case, he was not forthcoming with information. Investigators also searched property owned by the Steinhoff family, but found no trace of Jeremy. Terry Steinhoff was later convicted of an unrelated murder, and David Steinhoff has also been implicated in the case, though neither man was ever charged with Jeremy's disappearance. Diane Bright, Jeremy's mother, believes that his remains are somewhere in Coos County, and the family continues to hold out hope for answers. Jeremy's family believes he is deceased, and in August 2011, they held a memorial service to mark the 25th anniversary of his disappearance. Despite the years that have passed, the case remains unsolved, and the search for Jeremy Bright continues. On December 5, 1998, Derrick Angeron, a young boy, was out in the Rocky Point area of Winneman National Forest in Klamath County, Oregon, looking for a Christmas tree with his father and grandfather. During the day, Derrick wandered away from his family and soon became lost. Despite extensive air and ground searches, which were severely hampered by a blizzard that struck the area the evening Derrick was reported missing, very few clues were found regarding his whereabouts. The heavy snow and wind obliterated any tracks, making the search efforts even more difficult. Days later, volunteers discovered a candy wrapper and a Bonanza School bookmark near Rocky Point, as well as blood of an unknown origin, though it was unclear whether these items were connected to Derrick. Derrick had been enrolled at Bonanza School in 1998, and while the items may have provided some leads, they did not reveal anything definitive. In addition, a crude shelter made of fir boughs and fallen logs was found on a mountain in the area, but tracker dogs did not pick up Derrick's scent at the site. The temperatures in the days following Derrick's disappearance dropped below zero, and the area was beset with snow and wind, leading investigators to believe that Derrick could not have survived long in such harsh conditions. They speculated that he may have succumbed to the elements. Authorities initially investigated the case as a possible abduction, as a man driving a black Honda was reported to have been in the Rocky Point area on the same day Derrick went missing. The man reportedly asked for directions while in the forest, and a witness later claimed to have seen an individual struggling with a young boy in the area, although the witness did not stop, assuming the man was the boy's father. It remains unclear whether this incident was connected to Derrick's disappearance. Derrick's father and grandfather both took polygraphs and were ruled out as suspects. In 1999, authorities found graffiti scrawled on the wall of a public restroom that seemed to have a possible connection to Derrick's case. Though the wording of the graffiti was never disclosed, a portion of the wall was sent to a state laboratory for analysis. Investigators later determined that the writing was likely just a cruel joke. In 2004, convicted child rapist Frank J. Milligan emerged as the prime suspect in Derrick's disappearance. Milligan, a former aide in a children's psychiatric ward, was serving a 60-year prison sentence for the 2000 kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder of a 10-year-old boy. Milligan had also been convicted of sexually abusing another young boy. Authorities theorized that Derrick may have made it to the roadside on the day of his disappearance, where he was picked up by Milligan. An inmate who had been incarcerated with Milligan claimed that Milligan bragged about killing a missing boy while in prison. When confronted by authorities, Milligan confessed to killing Derrick, offering to lead investigators to the boy's body in exchange for a plea deal that would spare him the death penalty. However, a search of the area failed to yield any evidence, and Milligan later recanted his confession. He has never been charged in connection with Derrick's disappearance, although he remains a strong suspect in the case. Derrick had been carrying a small hatchet at the time of his disappearance, and his father stated that Derrick was familiar with mountain terrain and had often walked distances of up to 20 miles through the southern Oregon countryside. Derrick was also an avid reader of the Goosebumps book series by R.L. Stine at the time he went missing. His case remains unsolved, and authorities continue to consider various theories, but no conclusive evidence has been found to explain Derrick's disappearance or determine what happened to him. Sherry Iraly was a young woman who had just graduated from Sprague High School in Salem, Oregon, and was living with a cousin in an apartment in the south part of the city. In 1982, she worked part-time as a pizza delivery driver for a local Domino's pizza franchise. On the evening of July 4th, 1982, she was called into work to deliver a pizza, an event that would lead to her disappearance. At around 9:30 p.m. that night, Iraly left work to deliver a pizza to an address on Riverhaven Drive South, near Brown Island Road, in a remote area of Salem. She never returned, and she was never heard from again. Later that evening, Iraly's pizza delivery van was found abandoned. The van's parking brake was set, the door was open, and 3 large boxes of pizza were found lying on the ground nearby, with Iraly's hat also discovered in the vicinity. There were no signs of a struggle or altercation at the scene, which only deepened the mystery of her disappearance. Police quickly discovered that the address Iraly was supposed to deliver the pizza to was fictitious, and the person who had placed the order had also given a false name. The call had been made from a hotel in Salem, further complicating the investigation. The following day, a person called the Domino's Pizza, where Iraly worked, demanding a ransom for her safe return. However, after that call, there were no further attempts to collect the ransom, and the case took an even more perplexing turn. For many years, Darrell J. Wilson was considered a suspect in Iraly's disappearance. Wilson had initially denied knowing her, but later admitted that he was acquainted with her. He was also linked to a lime green pickup truck that was seen near the site where Iraly vanished just before her disappearance. Shortly after being questioned by police about Iraly's case, Wilson took his own life just hours after his interview. Following his death, police searched his vehicle for any physical evidence tying him to the case, but no conclusive evidence was found, and authorities later determined that he was not involved in Iraly's disappearance. The case remained unsolved for many years until December 2007, when authorities made a shocking announcement. William Scott Smith, already serving 2 life sentences for the abduction, rape, and strangulation murders of 2 other Salem women, had pleaded guilty to the murder of Sherry Iraly. Smith admitted that he and an accomplice, Roger Nosef, had planned to abduct another female Domino's pizza worker and hold her for ransom. However, the woman they had intended to target was not working that night, so they kidnapped Iraly instead. After abducting her, Smith confessed that he strangled her to death. Smith claimed it was Nosef who made the ransom call to Domino's Pizza. Nosef, who had passed away from cancer in 2003, was never charged in connection with Iraly's disappearance. Smith stated that after killing Iraly, he disposed of her body in the Pudding River, the same river where he had discarded the bodies of his other 2 victims. Although multiple searches of the river took place, no trace of Iraly's body was found. Due to frequent flooding in the Pudding River since 1982, investigators speculated that any potential evidence or remains may have been lost. Iraly's body has never been found, and though Smith's confession to her murder was a significant breakthrough, her case remains a somber reminder of the dangers she faced on that fateful night. Due to the circumstances of her disappearance and the confirmation of foul play, Sherry Iraly's case is still regarded as an unsolved mystery, despite the conviction of her killer.